Right, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Okay.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Medicaid Matters, the only live talk show about the business of Medicaid health care. And now, here's the host of Medicaid Matters, Richard Yaden.
And thank you, Braley. Welcome to another edition of Medicaid Matters. Well, is it super committee or super failure? That's what we're going to talk about today on Medicaid Matters. We're broadcasting to you live this Thanksgiving week, 2011. It's Tuesday, November 22nd. You've joined the only live talk show about Medicaid health care, and we're certainly glad that you're here today. I'm Richard Yaden, President and CEO of Managed Medicaid Services, and your host for the next 2 hours on Medicaid Matters. This is where Medicaid professionals come every other Tuesday to get the best and latest information, ideas, trends, topics, and news from Medicaid insiders, from Medicaid thought leaders. We're very happy, we're very thankful that you've chosen to spend the next hour with us here on Medicaid Matters. And on deck for today's show is the Congressional Super Committee, or super failure, as some of the headlines are now saying. As you're aware, they were scheduled to announce some recommendations tomorrow, but it would seem the only announcement is a big nothing. And we're going to talk about Medicaid, and we're going to talk about the Super Committee specifically. So I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear from our listeners and our viewers about your thoughts on the Super Committee and Medicaid, and what you had expected, maybe what actually turned out, and what we might see coming to us in the future. We want to know what you think about Medicaid funding. We want to know what you think about deficit reduction, in general or specifically as it relates to Medicaid. And in the second half of our show, we're going to be talking with Clay Farris. Clay is the publisher of Mostly Medicaid. Mostly Medicaid recently completed an in-depth analysis of the Super Committee and Medicaid, and you're not going to want to miss that. Our regular listeners know, and that's over 1,000 of you now, our regular listeners know what makes this show unique. And what makes this show unique is that it's unlike any other static webinar. It's unlike any other static presentation. Medicaid Matters is an informative, it's an entertaining, we certainly hope, and interactive talk show. And what that means is that you, our listeners, have so much to contribute to each and every discussion. And that's why we've made it very easy for you to interact with this show, for you to be a part of it, for you to contribute to each and every topic that we discuss on Medicaid Matters. And the easiest way for you to do that is to give us a call. And you can call us at 626-657-2125. That's 626-657-2125. And we'll be able to get you right here on the air. You can talk with one of our guests, or you can talk with me. If you have a question, you can ask it. If you have an opinion, you can express it. If you have information that you want to contribute to the conversation, well, you can do that too. If you can't call in, then our chat line is open. It's very easy to be a part of. If you go to the show page on the Blog Talk Radio Network, and that would be www.blogtalkradio.com/Medicaid Matters, and then just look for the chat box, and you'll see that it's very easy to be a part of this program that way. And speaking of our chat line, if you didn't know, about 1 hour before each show, we open that chat line, and we're hoping that you can come in and be a part of that discussion on there. Give us some information. Some of it we can share here on the air, but would like to have your contribution. So why don't you make a point of joining us an hour before our next show on that chat line. Also, if you're logged into Twitter, that's another way you can comment. That's another way that you can send a question. And that our Twitter ID is Medicaid Talk. So just get on there. You can either direct message us or in some way direct it to us on Twitter that you've got a thought or you've got a question. And because we want this show to be meaningful and relevant, we are continuing to experiment with a lot of different ways to make the show interactive, to bring the content to you. And thanks to the great people at Ustream TV, you can watch and listen to our show right from the Medicaid Matters website. If you'll go over to www.medicaidtalk.com, you'll see a screen down at the lower left-hand side, or excuse me, lower right-hand side of the web page, and you can watch the show here live. It's free, and also while you're there, you want to register for the Medicaid Matters newsletter. That's also free. And when you register, we're going to send you the top 10 resources for Medicaid information. This is a list that was compiled by our listeners, and it aired a few months ago during a show where we talked about it. And in fact, our guest today and his publication, Mostly Medicaid, are on that list. So register for our newsletter. You'll get the other 9 absolutely free, and you'll have that information for you. Hey, before we jump into the meat of today's show, I just want to real quickly let you know we're broadcasting here live from Nashville, Tennessee. We have a lot of severe weather moving through. I don't anticipate any kind of interruption in this. Normally our offices here at Managed Medicaid Services are very stable with respect to our internet service and our power. But if we do, for some reason, happen to drop off unexpectedly, just hang on for a few minutes. I'm sure we'll be right back up in just a few minutes. Well, there is a lot going on this week, and I've already mentioned the forthcoming super committee debacle, and that's really what you have to call it, I think. But this week is also our nation's Thanksgiving holiday. And like many of you, I'm going to be spending the week with my family for a traditional celebration here at our home near Nashville. It's always also a traditional run-up this weekend to the Christmas season and the busiest retail part of our year. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but this Saturday is also Small Business Saturday. Now, Small Business Saturday was something that's brought to us by American Express, and it's a day dedicated to supporting small businesses in one of the busiest shopping weekends of the year. So on Saturday, November 26th, they're asking millions of people to shop small at their favorite local stores and help fuel the economy. I think all of you know that small business is a huge economic driver in our economy, and we all know that small business is down. And when small business is down, tax revenue is down in the states, and we've certainly seen the effects of the decreased tax revenue in our industry, Medicaid healthcare. So Small Business Saturday is a great gesture for you to support and encourage those businesses, and I certainly encourage all of our listeners to take part in Small Business Saturday. Thanksgiving is also a time of year to pause and reflect on a lot of things. So I want you to indulge me here for just a minute, because reflection can also help focus our perception. And I think focusing our perception right now is very important. And you know, frankly, this is one of the luxuries that I have when you host your own radio show, is that you can take an indulgence like this for just a few minutes. You know, as I was doing some final preparation yesterday for today's show, the news alert flashed across my phone, and it said, "Debt panel has failed to reach a deal." And when I saw that, I knew that for many people it was going to be viewed as an absolute catastrophe. Yet I could also visualize the ensuing chatter that was going to pop up on news programs and see all the political scrambling that would be forthcoming. And yes, hey, there are real implications to this, and it is a complex issue. And for many weeks, most of the insiders have been telling me that this is going to be the likely outcome. Absolutely no deal. Now we're going to hear about this for many, many weeks to come. There will be finger pointing, there's going to be more posturing, more partisanship, more doom and gloom analysis. Then we'll hear more about it in the polls, about how so many Americans say that we're on the wrong track. And this party's popularity is bigger than this other party's popularity, whatever it might be. We'll also hear about credit downgrading. We'll also hear about a looming financial crisis, worse than what we've been through. And the so-called leaders of various factions and interest groups, they're going to take to the airwaves, and they're going to start promoting their position as if their position, and only their position, is what is going to save us. And yes, I said save us, because if you listen too long, you're going to start to perceive that everything is wrong. You can start to think that there is absolutely no attainable solution, and that we're spiraling down a long decline that we're never going to return from. That seems to be the building perception, and it seems to be what's becoming dominant if you listen too much to public opinion or news polls. Now, I don't mean to minimize any of the complexity of the issues that are facing debt reduction or facing Medicaid, nor am I so naive to believe that everything's going to turn out good in the end if we all just get along. When I spoke of refocusing our perception earlier, what I meant is that in the face of all of these crises, these issues, the negative press, the stress in business and personal financial lives, and really the seemingly unwillingness of our elected officials to do what we elected them to do, I still think we've got a lot going on for us. You know, it's almost cliche today to ask, what are you thankful for? So I'm not going to ask you that, but I am going to tell you what I think you should be thankful for, even with the shape that we're in today. You know, within our industry, to begin with, within our industry, we can be thankful for the leaders of the companies and the organizations that serve the Medicaid population. A few weeks ago, I was with many of them at the Medicaid Health Plans of America annual meeting. If you weren't there, you really missed something. And I don't mean just the presentations. You can be thankful that the leadership represented at that meeting, at that conference, are people who care deeply about their companies. They care deeply about this industry, and they care deeply about the Medicaid populations that they serve. It's a very mission-driven group of people, and I've never seen it to the degree to which I witnessed it just a few weeks ago. And although no deal has been reached by the super committee members, that rancorous debate was completed in a process that didn't yield any fistfights, didn't yield any bloodshed. And that's something, actually, that happens far too often in a lot of other countries. You know, we may not like the results sometimes of our process, but it is a process that has served us for over 200 years, and we can be at peace, and we can be thankful that we're at peace, knowing that that process is going to serve our future generations. We can also be at peace here, and we can enjoy this holiday with our families because so many of our fellow citizens have voluntarily chosen to not be with their families this year. They have voluntarily chosen to place themselves in dangerous and hostile situations so you and I can be together and, frankly, take the life that we have for granted. There are places that we know well, like Iraq and Afghanistan, but there are also people that are in very lonely places that are less publicized, places like Diego Garcia. So when you sit down Thursday and enjoy a time of peace and reflection with your family, I want to encourage you to pause. Take a moment, reflect, and be thankful for that young man who's eating his meal out of a plastic bag, sitting in the dirt on a mountainside in Afghanistan, or for that young woman who is standing a midnight watch at sea somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I've stood that watch before on a Thanksgiving, and I know what it's like. They didn't reach a deal in Washington. So we're going to forge ahead, hoping our leadership can be the people that we need them to be. But we can also forge ahead in our businesses, in our personal lives, because frankly, we've got a lot going for us. So let's keep that in mind this afternoon as we talk about the Super Committee, what it did or what it didn't do, and what it means for Medicaid health care. We'll be back in just a moment.
Nurses who want to stay on top of their skills know that the Nursing Informatics Learning Center is the place to go. You'll find articles, tutorials, a blog, e-zine, board-approved CE credits, links, assessments, and consultant services, all available to the global nursing community in one place. If you're a nurse or if your organization employs nurses, you need to visit the Nursing Informatics Learning Center. Go to www.medicaid-matters.com and click on Sponsor.
Medicaid Health Plans of America, ensuring access to better health care. Learn more about the innovative work by Medicaid Health Plans at MHPA.org. That's MHPA.org.
Are you a Medicaid industry expert, state executive, or thought leader? Can you share a perspective about the business of Medicaid that's unique, innovative, or even controversial? If so, you could be a future guest on Medicaid Matters. We are currently scheduling guests, and it's time to share your big idea about Medicaid. Go to our website and send us a message. Tell us what you want to talk about and how we can contact you. Make your voice heard. Make Medicaid better.
Elevating the quality of care with less cost. Today, that's the job of every Medicaid managed care company, but it can't be business as usual. Companies have to coordinate care a different way. The solution is managed Medicaid services. Through our virtual case manager network, our teams of Medicaid assessment specialists, and our new advanced care transitions program, companies can dramatically raise the quality of care without increasing their costs. Visit us today at MedicaidServices.net. Managed Medicaid Services, your best source for innovative care management.
And welcome back to Medicaid Matters, the only live talk show about the business of Medicaid health care. We're here live every other Tuesday talking about the business of Medicaid health care. As many of you know, our show is broadcast from the offices of Managed Medicaid Services. And this show is a service that we provide to our industry, and we're very thankful that it has been so well received by the Medicaid community. Over 1,000 listeners strong now and growing every week with each show. We want to say we appreciate you sharing the show with your business colleagues and those throughout the Medicaid industry. Managed Medicaid Services is a company that supports Medicaid organizations in several ways, helping them to get new Medicaid members integrated into their care programs faster and at less cost. Visit managedmedicaidservices.com for more details about how we can help you or your organization with that. Hey, we're back, and we want you to know that you can give us a call. We'd like to get your input on what the Super Committee has or hasn't done, in your opinion. I know that there's a lot of strong thoughts about the Super Committee, about what it could have done to benefit Medicaid, what it could have done to harm Medicaid, and we really would like to make this part of our show a very open and interactive forum to talk about that. So you can call us, you can tweet us at Medicaid Talk, that's the @ Medicaid Talk, or you can chat live from our show page at the Blog Talk Radio Network. That's at www.blogtalkradio.com/Medicaid Matters. Send us a question or comment right there. We've got several people that are signed in the chat right now. If any of you want to share your thought, you can do it there. Or better yet, just give us a call. 626-657-2125. That's 626-657-2125. A little later in the show, Clay Farris, publisher of Mostly Medicaid, is going to be joining us, so please stay around for that. You're not going to want to miss his conversation with us. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Mostly Medicaid did a very well organized, very well put together, and in-depth analysis of the super committee, what we could look for, what might have happened, what could have been on the plate. Yet there's a story behind the story, and Clay is going to talk to us about that as well. Well, today we are talking about the super committee and the fact that they appear to have failed to reach any kind of a deal. There was great hope coming that the super committee could find some answers, could solve some problems, not just in Medicaid but in deficit reduction overall. So there was a lot of hope there. But having not reached a deal, there are some automatic triggers that are going to kick into play, some automatic cuts, and already today. Those are at the top of the news items. There's debate going on in Congress now and on talk shows and news programs about how they're going to handle those automatic cuts. So those are supposed to come into play. We're going to talk about more of those and more of that in the second part of our show today. But before we go into that, I thought it might be helpful to give you some background on this group of congressional representatives and just what it could have possibly meant to Medicaid health care. I think most of our listeners are certainly familiar with the super committee. They're familiar that it's a committee that was charged with coming up with debt reduction recommendations. Those recommendations were supposed to be announced tomorrow, which is why we scheduled a show today to talk about them. We also know that in part of the process that created the super committee, that the Congress was supposed to vote on those recommendations on December 23rd. So that was really a key day, December 23rd, when that vote was supposed to take place. Now, I don't know if everyone realizes that super committee is not really the name of this group. It's actually called the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. Now, the committee was set up back in August of this year, and I believe the stated purpose was to find some kind of way for both parties to agree on a deficit reduction initiative. Now, this all came on the heels, if you'll recall, this past summer, this all came on the heels of the very hotly debated debt ceiling debacle earlier. If you remember back then, we had to raise the debt ceiling in order to fund so many programs to keep the government in operation and so forth. And I believe it was the Republicans who had put their foot down and said, we're not going to do it unless we can cut. So a compromise came out of that, which created the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. And this committee's its charge was to find a way to cut about $1 trillion out of the deficit. Now, this reminds me of a quote I read earlier the other day, a quote that was attributed to a Native American leader. I can't remember the name of the person who the quote is attributed to, but it was actually a quote that this Native American leader made about daylight savings time when Congress first enacted daylight savings time. But I think it's very, very similar here. When this Native American leader heard that Congress was going to, set the clocks back an hour, move them ahead an hour, he remarked that only the U.S. Congress could cut the top off a blanket, sew it on the bottom, and then claim that the blanket was longer. Well, I think there's a lot of similarities here as well in what we were trying to do in just deficit reduction. We weren't trying to necessarily balance the budget. We weren't trying to necessarily change the spending that was going on. We were just trying to reduce the amount of overspending that was going on. So this Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction, the super committee, was created. It has 6 members on the committee from each party, and maybe that was a forewarning of the stalemate that the committee was ultimately going to achieve. And in their defense, though, they were given, I think, frankly, an almost impossible task. First, they had to get a majority of the members of that committee to agree on any recommendations. And secondly, none of the deficit reduction recommendations that likely would have come from that committee or that were forecast to come from that committee, none of them would have received any kind of popular support. And we all know how difficult it is for Congress to do anything that doesn't have popular support. Newt Gingrich, who is also a presidential candidate right now, or at least a primary candidate, he made a remark that I thought is interesting about the super committee shortly after it was created. And frankly, he didn't see, as many people on both sides of the aisle didn't see this committee as a winnable solution. And what Gingrich said was they're going to walk in just before Thanksgiving and say, all right, we can shoot you in the head or we can cut off your right leg. Which do you prefer? And I guess that's why we don't have any decision, is because nobody wants to ask that question. So from what we know today, and just as recently as an hour ago when I was checking the news outlets in preparation for the show, from what we know today, it would appear the committee just didn't have the stomach to ask that question. And regardless of what political perspective that you might come from, I think everyone can agree that Congress has been ducking the hard choices for years and years. Well, what do you think? What do you have to say about it? Do you think it was a winnable or unwinnable situation? Do you think the super committee just had no stomach for it, or did they really try to come to a resolution and just frankly there wasn't anything that could be done? Give us a call, 626-657-2125. Would really like to have your input about where you see the super committee, what it has done and where it shakes out. So the lack of a deal here actually, I think, if you look at it, the lack of a deal here is actually a failure to make a moral decision. It would seem that the committee would rather hide under the cover of automatic provisions, and that is the triggers that take place because they didn't reach any kind of recommendation. It seems that they would rather hide under that cover than it would to take the lead in the task that had been given. But to do nothing, frankly, to me, is a disappointment, and it is a fundamental lack of leadership and integrity on many levels. Medicaid is a health system. It's a health care system that is dependent upon leadership and dependent upon integrity. People who depend on this system, you know who they are. I mean, I probably don't need to educate my listeners. It's men, it's women, and especially children who do not have the means to access even basic health care. And it's not only a matter of not having the financial means, it's often a matter of just not understanding how to get to that care. It's just not an understanding of how to make solid health care decisions. So Medicaid serves those who cannot serve themselves for many reasons. And to do nothing with the money and the funding for a system like that, just to me, is an abdication of moral leadership. So there's a possibility, I know, that some recommendations may still be forthcoming, even if the committee, really announces officially tomorrow that it's not going to do anything. I guess there is a possibility that some recommendations may be coming forward. And our guest, Clay Farris, who will be on in just a few minutes, he will likely address some of those in the second half of our show. But what do you think? What do you think? You, our listeners, are in this day in and day out. You're listening and you're working with this day in and day out. What do you think? Did the committee do the right thing by not making any kind of recommendation? Certainly not any kind of Medicaid recommendations. So let's hear what you have to say. I'm sure you have an opinion. I'm sure you have other information that might shed some light on this. Again, call us at 626-657-2125, 626-657-2125. The chat line is open. We do have some people signed in there. If you want to jump in and log in, it's very easy to do. It's free. both with the call and with the chat room. Complete anonymity. If if you're not allowed to make a comment for fear it'd be something to have to do with your company. So send us your thoughts. There's at least someone out there, I'm sure, who has an opinion about this. So we're going to stop and we're going to pause here before we start the second half of the show today. Again, the phone lines are open, 626-657-2125. You want to be a part of the show, that's 626-657-2125. Stay with us. There's lots more to come next.
You're listening to Medicaid Matters on the blogtalkradio.com network.
By providing access to the care they need and the quality they deserve, Medicaid health plans enhance health outcomes of our nation's underserved. Listen to this letter to a Medicaid health plan that helped save the life of Juan, a 4-year-old with a rare heart disease.
All of your efforts have created a miracle for my son. Even though he was so close to death, you helped. You made a difference. Now he's coming along, little by little, step by step.
Medicaid Health Plans of America, ensuring access to better health care. Learn more at mhpa.org.
Hey, if I should also mention this, if you or your company are trying to get a message out to the Medicaid business community, then this is the place for you to do it. Become a sponsor of Medicaid Matters and reach more of your targeted Medicaid community. We have over 1,000 listeners to our show. All of them are people involved in the Medicaid healthcare business in one way or another. If you'd like to learn more how to be about joining us as a sponsor of the show, you can email us at info@medicaidtalk.com, or you can call us at 615-257-1627.
Hi, this is Clay Farris bringing the Mostly Medicaid news headlines for the second 2 weeks of November 2011. Our first headline comes from the Washington Post. Super Committee appears unlikely to reach agreement. According to the Post, details on how to fund the plan are keeping the Super Committee from reaching agreement. Headline 2 from the San Francisco Chronicle. Settlement saves services for the elderly and disabled. According to the Chronicle, 35,000 elderly and disabled Californians are very happy as of today because Governor Brown's plan to shut down adult daycare has been stopped. The plan would have saved the state $170 million, but advocates were successful in suing Brown to keep the cut from taking place. Headline 3 comes from the Denver Post. Hickenlooper, Medicaid waivers not a budget option. Governor John Hickenlooper is not opening discussion with Colorado conservatives on the ideas to reduce Medicaid spending through Medicaid waivers from CMS. Medicaid is going to account for 82% of the increase in Colorado's general fund increased spending next year. Hickenlooper will not discuss options that could be possible from CMS, but he has been more than willing to greatly reduce spending on education in order to meet budget shortfalls. Headline 4 comes from the Salt Lake Tribune. Utahns' mandated charity work for Medicaid is demeaning. The Utah Medicaid program has a new proposal on the table in which many Medicaid beneficiaries would be required to do volunteer work in exchange for their health care coverage. A lot of beneficiaries are very upset about this. Next headline comes from NebraskaTV.com. Kansas official hired as Arkansas Medicaid chief. Andy Allison, who was recently the Medicaid director in Kansas, is now the new Arkansas Medicaid director. Congratulations go out to Andy.
For more information about these news stories, as well as to check out analysis of Medicaid industry topics and job listings, visit us at MostlyMedicaid.com.
And we want to thank MostlyMedicaid.com for their regular news updates on our show. They do a great job of giving us those news headlines every other week. They're always on top of what's happening in Medicaid, and you really should think about being a regular subscriber to their material. Hey, Hey, if you have a comment or a thought, let's hear from you today. Again, that number, 626-657-2125. Unless everybody is on Thanksgiving vacation this week, I know some of you have a very strong opinion about the Super Committee, a very strong opinion about Medicaid funding, and that's what we're talking about here today. So give us a call. When you call, Linda's going to answer, ask you a couple of questions, and then let us know that you'd like to contribute to the conversation. We'll bring you into the conversation at the most appropriate time. Well, with us today, I'm very pleased to say, is the voice of Mostly Medicaid, the person that we just heard in our news update. He is not only the voice of Mostly Medicaid, but he's also the publisher, and that is Clay Farris. Clay, welcome to Medicaid Matters.
Good afternoon, Richard. How are you?
Well, I am doing great. I'm glad you were able to take some time aside on this I guess, busy holiday week for many people to join us. Hey, before we jump into this, there actually might be some people listening who have not had a chance to engage some of the incredible resources that you've created, or that resource that you've created called Mostly Medicaid. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about Mostly Medicaid before we jump into the topic?
Yep, I'd love to. We began about 5 years ago. We noticed a need for what we think of as a business-focused source of Medicaid information. So what we typically do is combine business of Medicaid with the politics of Medicaid and try to bring that fresh perspective. You can learn all about us at moslymedicaid.com. When we began, we realized there's plenty of really strong advocacy-based sources out there. Think Kaiser Family Foundation, Urban Institute, and they typically strengthen the common Medicaid talking points of insure the uninsured and increase Medicaid spending. So we knew we didn't need more of that. So we were one of the first ones, we think, to really start pushing this idea of Medicaid as an industry. Anything that spends north of $300 billion a year, we have to be honest and call it an industry. And we offer free and premium content on the website, and we do analysis of key trends, hot topics, and news. We have a pretty substantial LinkedIn networking group. And then we provide things like the news headlines for folks like you.
Well, I appreciate it, and again, I want to encourage our listeners, if they haven't been to moslymedicaid.com, to go there and check it out. One of the things that you've done, Clay, in the past that I think is probably one of the best pieces that I've seen put together is the, and I'm probably going to call it the wrong thing, but it's that booklet that you have, which is a kind of a basic overview of the Medicaid industry. What is that specifically called?
Oh, that's the crash course.
Yes, the crash course.
Yep, several months ago, and for folks it's really designed for folks that have been in the industry maybe a little less than 3 years is our best estimate. And the tagline is, it teaches you 90% of what you need to know to succeed in the Medicaid industry in under 90 minutes. It's sort of a question-based format that really kind of crams a lot of information in visually for things that you may not easily pick up along the way. Sort of one of those I wish someone would have told me this years ago type books. Yeah,
it is. It's fantastic. I would encourage any organization that hires someone into their company that where that person is new to Medicaid, that they would get that book and go through it. To give you a real interesting anecdote, Clay, I was at the Medicaid Health Plans of America conference a couple weeks ago, and after we finished our show there, someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I just moved into the Medicaid industry, been a successful person, I think in a provider environment. So I just got involved in the Medicaid industry. Where can I learn more about this?" And I mentioned your crash course to him. He said, "Oh, I've already been through that. That was excellent." So a little bit of third-party endorsement there. Well, what a week this has been. It's already, or it's only Tuesday, and it has been a heck of a week already, I think. I know everybody in Medicaid was waiting to find out tomorrow just what the impact the super committee was going to deliver, and now it kind of seems a little anticlimactic. Why do you think there was this lack of a deal, that nothing happened?
I think there's multiple reasons why there was a lack of a deal, including ultimately bad design on the procedures. But I think, and I can talk about that more in a minute, but I think you've obviously got polarization of parties. I'm still not sure why 435 folks thought 12 folks could come up with a different answer, especially when you look at the 12 folks they put on there.
Yeah.
Right down the line, as probably as partisan as you could get. I think there were some poison pill tactics, like the Medicare cuts, that were in some of the deals that could have happened, that could have been based on the leaks. I think there were some things that really were non-starters. I think there's a basic habit and culture of kicking the can anyway, so maybe there doesn't seem to be a lot of consequences in the average member or representative's mind that this did fail. I know that sounds like, hey, how could they not get it? But it really is business as usual if you look at how appropriations typically happen. It's possible that the Democrats on the committee were pretty savvy when they looked at the way the sequestration was going to work, the automatic cuts. Most 50% of those go to defense, and most of the domestic entitlements are fairly protected, including Medicaid. So it actually is a good thing in the short term for the Democrats for there to be failure. So I think there's a lot of reasons that it's failed, not the least of which it's a very, very complex thing. But I don't think anyone's terribly surprised. I mean, that was our projection, as well as most other folks, as early as several weeks ago.
Yeah, I would agree. When we were at the conference as well, we kept hearing people say that the most likely outcome was no outcome. So it's unfortunate, and because it's not just with Medicaid, it's a huge issue that needs to be dealt with. Hey, last week you put together, I thought, was an excellent piece on MostlyMedicaid.com about the super committee and Medicaid. What led you to take the time and effort to put that together?
Well, really to prepare for the show. No, I'm just kidding. we wanted to get a little deeper into what it might mean for Medicaid and our readers, and I think we're starting to look at a path of events around healthcare that are really converging to dramatically reshape Medicaid. I think the super committee, if this was a 3-act play about the changes in U.S. healthcare, I think the super committee failure really was just the end of Act 1. So it kind of got our attention. But when you think about super committee, 2012 election, U.S. economy, 2014 with the things that are set to kick off with health reform, there's a lot going on. So I think this is sort of the beginning of really our ears perking up. The super committee analysis was.
I think and I've heard people say this over and over, it was certainly a prevalent sub-theme at the conference a couple weeks ago, that there is more going on in Medicaid, specifically, but healthcare in general today than there ever has been. Do you see that your readers and subscribers are saying that, and have they been concerned about what the super committee might do to Medicaid?
Leading up to the super committee failure announcement, I haven't seen a lot of direct concern. I think that's for two main reasons. I think a lot of our readers realized the committee itself, if the automatic cuts came through, it was not going to be a short-term threat to Medicaid. So I think they weren't necessarily keyed into it there, but I also think they're pretty busy watching the very real risk to Medicaid at the state level. That's another thing that we often forget if we're talking about federal events such as super committee. I mean, the states have had to deal with Medicaid budget crisis for several years now, and I think that's where a lot of the focus will be. Now, judging from the analysis frenzy this morning, I think we're going to see a lot more of our readers and a lot more of healthcare wonks in general interested in the super committee. But up to this point, I think it's not been quite as much on the radar as I might have expected.
Well, now after the next break, I want to get into kind of what now what now with Medicaid now that they haven't passed any kind of deal or anything like that. But that was I'm curious because I don't know the answer to this. But what becomes of the super committee now? Is it now just disbanded and we're back to business as usual, or is there something else that they have to do?
I believe, personally, I actually think we may see a resurrection of the super committee. I'm not exactly sure of how the procedures work. I was looking at they have their own website, by the way.
I'm sure that cost millions too.
And they have hours and hours and hours of their hearings. Personally, I think it's not quite over yet for them. The real deadline, if you look at the way the Joint Commission set up, is the late December voting deadline. Depending on the reaction we see, I believe you might see enough pressure to try to bring them back to the table. That may be on the outside in a lot of projections. Personally, I think we may see them come back over the next few days or maybe even after Thanksgiving. That really depends on the pressure that's put on them, though. We've already seen the markets react.
Sure.
We really need to see how the general public will react.
Right. And if I don't think there's any kind of legislative pressure that requires them to come back. Is there? I may be missing that.
I believe that's correct. I mean,
Okay.
they've sort of surprised us because they've called it quits about 2 days early.
I know.
But again, the Congress can do anything it wants. But I think in the current act that established them, I believe they can very well be done at this point.
Okay. Well, let's pause for a couple of minutes here before we get back to our subject. We're going to talk more about this issue as well as how Mostly Medicaid is involved with it. What do you think? What is your thought on this? You can call us at 626-657-2125. That's 626-657-2125. Would love to hear what your take is on the Super Committee and what it could or should or would have done. Back in just a moment.
I hope you're enjoying today's show, and I want to remind you that opinions and viewpoints expressed by guests on the Medicaid Matters Talk Show are not necessarily those of the host or our sponsors. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Every 19 seconds, a child will die because of a lack of clean water. It is estimated that more than 80% of childhood diseases and deaths in underdeveloped countries are a direct result of drinking contaminated water. During the course of this commercial, 3 children will die. You can help make a difference in the lives of these children. By supporting Healing Hands International, you will provide safe, clean drinking water to families and villages around the world. Since 2006, Healing Hands has drilled more than 400 water wells in countries like Haiti, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and Honduras. Through the help of people like you, we have been able to bring the gift of clean water to more than 1 million people. To learn more about Healing Hands International and what we are doing to help, visit www.hhi.org. With your help, we can continue this life-saving work and make a significant difference in the lives of children.
Hi, this is Richard Yaden, and I want to take a minute to tell you about Ring Central. For more than 5 years, I've used Ring Central as my primary phone service in all of my businesses. And I know why Ring Central has become the #1 cloud-based phone system. Now, you might say that your company has a phone system, so why would you need Ring Central? Well, does your company ever need to quickly establish a presence in a new market? Do you use remote staff on a temporary basis? Do you have a side business, or do you do project-based consulting? It keeps your mobile phone number confidential and gives you a very professional presence. It's also easy and inexpensive to add a second line at home. And it's all less than $25 a month. If you even think Ring Central could be a solution for you, then you need to check them out. Visit our sponsors page and click on their ad, and you'll get a 30-day free trial. You won't regret your decision.
Well, happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and welcome back to Medicaid Matters. You know, our sponsors help make this show possible. We want to give them access, and we want to give you resources and services that Medicaid professionals and companies can use. So visit our sponsor page at www.medicaidtalk.com. You'll get more information there. There are links to explore their services and ideas. So make that a part of your stop today, and while you're there on the website. Also, if you're there on the website today, don't forget to register for our newsletter. It's free, and if you register, then we will send you the top 10 resources for Medicaid information, one of which is Mostly Medicaid, and we're talking with the publisher today. We're in the last segment of our show, or the last part of our hour. If you've been waiting to be a part of the program, now is the time to do that. 626-657-2125. You can chat with us. We have a number of people signed in right now on the chat line. So what are your comments? Send them there, and we'll get them on the air. You can also tweet us at Medicaid Talk. As I mentioned, we're talking with Clay Farris, publisher of Mostly Medicaid. And Clay, wanted to touch on real quickly. There were several scenarios that you said were possible with respect to the deal that could come out, other than the no deal scenario. What were some of the popular outcomes that were expected from the committee before we found out they weren't going to do anything?
Well, as you can imagine, there were rumors galore. There were several things leaked. I think they basically fit into two main categories. One would be some sort of partial deal, which the super committee might come up with, say, half of the $1.2 trillion delta that they needed. And then the other half would need to be handled through appropriations process or some other means. And the other main scenario was sort of the grand bargain, in which there would be dramatic changes and dramatic compromises. Nobody really believed in the latter. If you look at the former, in which there would be a partial deal, there were several folks that were getting behind that. J.P. Morgan actually gave that its highest probability rating, I think 50% as of last week.
Well, it's, I personally feel it's a shame that nothing was done, but what happens now with Medicaid? Now that there were potential cuts in Medicaid, it could have been left alone, but I know there are automatic triggers across the board on different things. So what happens with Medicaid now?
Well, with Medicaid, if the automatic cuts go as planned, Medicaid is actually safe. Medicaid, SSI, and for the most part, Medicare is safe. I believe Medicare is exposed up to 2% in rate reductions. The sequestration, the fancy word for the auto cuts, lays out defense taking half of it, so roughly $600 billion over 10 years, and it lays out other domestics taking the other half. So in this case, Medicaid is actually probably off the chopping block for all intents and purposes. If it doesn't go as planned, which you already see, I think you had McCain this morning talking about getting out of it. I know President Obama has already talked about vetoing anyway, sort of getting out of these auto cuts. But if it doesn't go as planned, we're predicting that those with the focused lobbying power are obviously be the ones to reshape it, and they've got a year to do it. The auto cuts don't happen until 2013, so they're going to have all of 2012, an election year, to tell everybody why those cuts don't need to happen to them. Defense experts themselves have been giving pretty explicit impact scenarios over the last several weeks of what will happen to defense if they take the full $600 billion. So if the defense lobby is successful, maybe you'll see some reshifting on domestics. Maybe they'll try to change the rules. But for Medicaid right now, again, if it goes as planned, which would be a more ordered or structured scenario, then Medicaid in the short term is safer.
Well, I tell you, Clay, I think, just considering past history, with this being a presidential election year, I can't imagine Congress having the will or the, and I said this earlier, the moral integrity to do some of these hard decisions between now and the next presidential election. I just, personally just don't see it happening. Do you think...
I think that's...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But I think that's right. I think, and some of the things we started to touch on in our latest analysis on this is we still have the luxury of our ideologies at this point. You can watch Greece, you can watch the EU. We're still not, even though as bad as we think it is with the U.S. economy, we still have the luxury to disagree over whether or not we can cut. And I think that's going to continue in 2012. I think you're still not going to have very real pain points for the Congress to do actual cuts. What I think you will see And what the supercommittee failure gives us a prelude to, there's two narratives that have come out of this. Narrative one, the left, is the problem is not shared sacrifice, rich not paying their fair share. That's Chairperson Murray was saying that. And narrative two is a problem, obviously, that entitlements are out of control. This is the one that you'll see from the right, including wasteful and extravagant spending with limited results. And I think what the election year is going to do is really entrench both of those narratives. So I don't see any change in 2012, but if things like the Office of Management and Budget projections are right to officially put us back in recession next year, if employment doesn't, level out, I think we're running out of time in which we have those luxuries.
Yeah. Do you think Medicaid has become an untouchable federal budget issue?
I think it's becoming more touchable. At this point, and this has to do with its nature juxtaposed to Medicare. Medicare usually is the boogeyman, especially in election cycles. It's one thing with a centralized administration, essentially, and it's much more federal or national in nature. So I think it's currently more untouchable at a federal level. I think Medicaid is definitely a big voting issue at the state level, but it's been kept muddy for quite a while at the federal level, exactly what it means politically. That's not to say that it may become more untouchable, but at this point, I think just to see some things on the table for this time, I think is kind of the introduction of what we may see for Medicaid's future.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about any resources that Mostly Medicaid has available that will help people stay on top of these issues.
Well, we have our free newsletter. We have our LinkedIn group. We always have lots of discussions going on in various things on the LinkedIn group. Folks can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We're pretty active there with various news topics. We've got analysis on the website. There's free and premium content, so there's something for everybody. You mentioned the crash course earlier. Those are the easiest ways to sort of plug into all the different stuff that we have.
Do you accept content from outside contributors?
We do. We have several folks that write for us. We have several folks that we partner with. If any of your listeners are interested, just send an email to clay@moslymedicaid.com and we'll get you started.
Okay. So what's coming up from Mostly Medicaid in 2012 that our listeners should know about?
We're going to focus on what we call our deep dives, which are just more detailed analysis on particular issues, and usually they'll include about a 10 or 12-minute podcast. For special interest. We think right now what we're planning on diving into is some stuff around HIEs. 2014, we want to really kind of educate folks on what to expect under health reform. That's kind of been around the corner for a long time, and it's getting closer. We think changes in policy around the NNEs or the dual eligibles is something we're also going to do deep dives on. We're putting together another white paper for getting the job you want in the Medicaid industry. And we're also looking at opening up some new product lines related to Medicare, to where a lot of our readers work in both Medicare and Medicaid, and we want to start providing some value for those in Medicare as well. Hey,
real quickly, I wanted you to also tell listeners about your provider-focused newsletter that you have.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. Richard.
I'm sorry. You have a provider-focused newsletter. I wanted you to just take a minute and tell our listeners about that.
Are you talking about the Hospital Advantage?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, that.
Yeah, right. So Mostly Medicaid Hospital Advantage, what this does is it gives analysis of news in your state, geared towards large physician practices, but also more so towards hospitals, just to keep individuals that may need to know about that. These are the hospital finance administrators or maybe sort of strategic planners, to provide one more way for them to stay on top of that. The value there is that it's really focused on what's going on in your state.
Okay, great. Yeah, excellent resource. Clay, thank you for being on our show today. These are really exciting times at Medicaid. I'm glad we've got a resource like Mostly Medicaid that we can turn to for news, information, analysis, all those types of things. So thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks a lot.
Great. Clay Farris, Mostly Medicaid, publisher, and the voice of Mostly Medicaid here on Medicaid Matters for our news updates.
Seconds.
Well, that's almost all we have for today. Just a few reminders before we get away. Our next show is Tuesday, December 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you put that on your calendar and plan to join us then. And until then, I hope you have a safe and very happy Thanksgiving holiday. This is Medicaid Matters. I'm Richard Yaden, your host. Today is Tuesday, November 22nd, and I'll be back again in 2 weeks right here on Medicaid Matters. Have a great day.